So, good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. That's okay. Good evening, everybody. For those who don't know me, my name is Maxwell, and I have become the solicitor now that my friend Chris Griffiths has gone on to the Supreme Court. He left me for good. And so I'm trying to do my best to fill his shoes. I worked with Chris for 12 years, and I miss him every day that he's been gone. Yeah, okay. I wish I had a mic. I'll do my best. And I'll probably speak this close so everyone can hear. Because I am a little soft. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I have been in municipal government for 22 of my years practicing law. Working over at the county back in the early 2000s. And one of the things that I do is I'm a senior fellow at the University of Delaware in their Institute of Public Administration. And one of the things that they make me do is teach FOIA and ethics. And I do it 3-4 times a year. So I was asked to come over and give sort of my standard fare presentation. It's not necessarily totally tailored towards the city of Newcastle. There's a few Newcastle sprinkles in there, but it's generally my standard presentation. So I'm going to just go through it like I always do. I love questions. If you got questions, ask, I'll answer them to the best of my ability. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you I don't know, but I'll hazard a guess. Nobody can take this as legal advice. I'm acting in my capacity as a professor. Okay, so here we go. So council knows, the public may not know, that there is an appendix in Article 1 of the Newcastle City Code, which deals with the Freedom of Information Act. And it largely mirrors some of the requirements that are in Delaware Freedom of Information Act. If you want to look it up, to 29 Delaware Code 1000. Just go to the state, just to Delaware Code online, 29 to the 1000 categories. Ultimately, FOIA only really deals with two things, and that is deal with open meetings and open records. And when I go through this, I'm going to show you that it's not necessarily logical what has been held that is a FOIA violation, what is not. And I'll try to point those out as I go along. Why do we have FOIA? Let's go to page 3, the public policy of FOIA. And it's so that public business be performed in open and have the opportunity to observe public officials doing their business. So everyone can come to council, observe you guys doing your thing, right? But it's not just limited to the council doing their thing. It's also the boards, the commissions, everything else. And public documents should be accessible by the public. There's a lot of misconception as to what is and is not a public document. So we'll go over that today too. But the first thing I want to start with is who is subject to FOIA? Who? Well, we all know that the town council is subject to FOIA. We know that the town administration is subject to FOIA. But when do you have to have an agenda? When do you have a meeting? Well, that's pretty tricky because look, I have right here and there. A public body includes about anything, any board, bureau, commission, department, agency, committee, ad hoc committee. Guess what? If you're on one of those, you're subject to FOIA regarding that committee. So, you know, we could have a committee to study to upgrade the senior center. That would be subject to FOIA. You would have to have a, you know, if it was done by the city, obviously a private committee was not, but if it was done by the city, you would have to have a meeting notice, an agenda, just like you would anything else. And I leave in here, by the way, this packet may seem long, but I will go through it very quickly. And I have a lot more examples if you need them, but I thought this was a great one. City of Rehoboth, also my client, they had a working group put together, a working group to study rate structures. You know, how much is your building permit, and, you know, that kind of stuff. And he had the mayor, the finance director, the public works director, the 4 members of the public. So it wasn't really a committee like we would formally think of a committee, right? Usually council would appoint a group. I was here for the sea level rise committee, right? So that's a more traditional committee, but it was held that the mayor putting together this group to look at rate structures was a committee. So that means their emails were foilable by the public. That means they should have posted agendas and they had to have minutes. They had to post them 7 days in advance. Another one that I kept in here, and pretty new, and it comes out of DENREC, right? The Parks Director, so like, to me, the Parks Director is like the city manager of the parks. And he had established a group that was, and it wasn't elected officials or anything, it was just a group that got together to review surf fishing programs. So he took residents and people from, hey, hell, that was a group that needed to follow FOIA. And in that case, so state FOIA is different than municipal FOIA. I just want to describe some of the differences. We'll get through that. All I'm talking about tonight is municipal FOIA. But if it's a state agency, they have a requirement to post things on a centralized website. And I should have looked up what that website was tonight before I came here, but I forgot. I forgot to do that. But you can find it. There's a state calendar. So they are required to post their agendas on this state website. In a municipality, even though you guys, Newcastle, as far as I know, post about everything that I can see, you're not required to do so. All you need to do is post a notice on the town hall. So,
Of the email. So I have a town email and have a personal email. What's for it? Just the town email or the personal email?
so you're going to get a little bit more. So the question was, in case you couldn't hear it, there was 2 emails, I have a personal email and I have a city of Newcastle. And there was a out of the city of Newark in 2007, there was a FOIA decision that says only the government issued email was subject to FOIA. That got reversed in 2019. So your personal email, as it relates to public business, is subject to FOIA. And from a council standpoint, this is really only the council. I don't think you guys have ever had a big federal lawsuit related to any decision that you made. At least I'm not aware of it in my 22. Maybe you have, I don't know. But that's the kind of work that I do. I defend those. So what happens in a federal or a chancery lawsuit, you will get, there's electronic discovery requirements, whether or not it's FOIAable or not. And I have to go in and I have to flash every device that you guys as council use for your public business. So if you say, I send emails about this from this device, from this thing, I have to flash those. And guess what? Then we have to run searches on everything in there because it's required by the courts that you have to go through this process. We have to run searches and then all that gets produced. So my very strong advice to all members of council and anyone who has a town email, city email, excuse me, use only your town email for public business, period, done. Because there are situations, and merely because at this trick, we had people say, well, if I send it by my private email account, then I don't have to produce it in FOIA. No, you still have to produce it. It's still political.
If you're on a subcommittee and you haven't been given a city email, can you request one?
I don't know the technology capabilities of the city. I've only been here like 6 weeks. At the end of the day, if you're on a subcommittee, the likelihood of having all of your stuff for it is much, much less. But remember, I just told you about when I go in and we have to do these searches and we have to do search terms. Piece of advice. The first thing I do when I get all of our documents in for that is I look for cuss words or bad words. I have a whole list of them, right? And I do a search for those. Do you know why I do a search for those? Because I know those are going to be the documents the other side is going to use first in their case. So I guess my point is, if you're going to write something on public business, don't use cuss words. Don't call somebody an idiot. Don't put it in writing. Believe me, I've been doing this a long time. I've seen it all, and it happens. So sort of to the point, there's a 2-part test whether the working group constitutes a public body. This is the most recent pronouncement from the AG's office. Does it fall within the statutory definition? If you go back to the statutory definition, everything under the sun constitutes a community. And then, and if the entity in question is impliedly or specifically charged to make reports, investigations, or recommendations, it's subject to FOIA, so like the planning commission. And the one exception that they have is public bodies. Now, I will freely admit that I think the AG's office is wrong on this, because I think they read the definition too broad. But guess what? They get to make the law. I just have to tell you what to follow and what they're saying. So, all public meetings, all public bodies have to meet in public. And so we used to have Panera in Newark, so all the little tiny committees would meet at the Panera Bread. That's okay. It doesn't have to be a city-owned something. It has to be within the city. If there's any doubt whether or not it's a public meeting, treat it as something to do with a public meeting. And we're going to get to agendas and all of that, but it's something to do. So it's something you ought to do. Now, there's been some new additions, and I'm going to breeze through them. Sure.
It makes sense to me why AG, who slides ago, is ruling that is a football group, but I just wanted to hear why do you think it's wrong, I guess, like.
Because every single definition, because here's my point, there's FOIA decisions that talk about. Like, we can't have all public business be done in public, like the folks who work in town, city hall, right? They have to work together and that's a group, so that can't be public. So some of the little tiny committees that were established by the city manager and that kind of thing, I think that takes it way too far. Because you could have committees, and I have a hard time drawing a bright line. The bright line that I used to draw was if it was a committee established by the council for official purpose. When I taught this 15 years ago, that's what I would say. It's a committee, established by the governing body. That's subject to FOIA. I don't care if you're looking at Christmas trees in the park. I don't care what it is. Established. That was the bright line rule. Now I have no bright line rule like that to tell you. So we have to assume that every single committee that's put together beyond sort of outside of town hall functions like a committee. That's why I think they're wrong.
Well, I guess.
It doesn't matter why, it doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter what I think. So it's me editorializing. Okay, so all right. Now, it used to be, I used to teach that FOIA only allowed you to watch. This past year, the General Assembly amended the FOIA statute, and you have to have public comment. So all of those committees that meet, the town council has to have public comment. Now, that does not mean that you have to allow hours and hours of public comment. You can have a public comment period limited to 15 minutes with 2 or 3 speakers, right? But you have to have it. So, and you can have a virtual meeting. And remember those little committees we were talking about? You still have to have what's called an anchor location. So you can have a virtual meeting. Now, you guys don't do for town council. You guys have Zoom on.
People can't call in
People can't talk on that, right?
Yes,
It's
they
just for
can.
visual only,
and
right?
listen.
So if you want to talk, well, you can have a virtual meeting like you sure did during the pandemic and everybody did.
And then we took comments.
They took comments. So you can have a virtual meeting. So for example, give me an obscure, what we're gonna call it we're gonna call it can't come up with an example. The Committee to Beautification for the Statue of something. Okay, we have this committee, okay? So we have this beautification committee, and let's go work on this one narrow project. They have to have an anchor, and it wasn't like this during the pandemic, but now they have to have an anchor location where people can come in person and watch what's going on. There has to be at least one person there, and you have to have it open to the public that people can come in person. But everybody and all the members who are participating in that committee can then be virtual. As long as people can interact and talk, it's perfectly fine. Zoom is fine. The anchor location is what everybody gets tripped up on, because every single time I go and somebody wants to have a virtual meeting, I'm like, where is the anchor location? I'm like, we don't have one. I'm like, well, you have to have one. So, and that virtual meeting functions just like any other meeting. And what is the anchor location? I have a definition. It's a physical location within a geographic jurisdiction of the public body and where one or more members can participate. So let's talk about notice, what you have to give. Notice is 7 days in advance of the meeting. Why is it 7 days? I have no idea. That's just the date they threw out, I think, a week before. And you should, as part of those, have your agenda posted, and the city of Newcastle does it right. I've looked at all of your agendas. You guys have a wonderful, and under FOIA, regularly scheduled meeting determined to be any meeting where 7 days notice is given. So it doesn't matter that you meet on the second Tuesday, that's not your regularly scheduled meeting under FOIA. It's any meeting that has 7 days. Okay, that's always a regular meeting. You have to post it, meeting, at the principal office, town hall. And if you have a virtual meeting, you have to say so. You can reschedule those meetings. Let's say you didn't have a quorum, but you have to give at least 24 hours notice. And a special meeting is anything that's less than 7 days notice. So long as you have me as your solicitor, we're going to try, never have a meeting on less than 7 days notice. But there are circumstances, right? Got the hurricane that's coming, right? It's coming up. Yeah, that's an emergency meeting. Yes, you can do that. Yes, I'll authorize a meeting. But we're not going to authorize a meeting on less than 7 days notice, unless it's an emergency. Let me give you an idea, and we're going to talk in a minute about amending the agenda. There are times where you can amend the agenda. For example, I am in litigation and a court issued a decision on a Wednesday. You guys have a meeting the next Tuesday. I couldn't have given 7 days notice to discuss that with the council in executive session because I didn't have it, right? I have to file a motion for re-argument of that within 7 days. So guess what? I can't give 7 days notice. I can't physically give 7 days notice. So yes, I could amend the agenda for that meeting or have a special meeting if I had to, because there's an emergency, right? There's a ticking time bomb. Besides that, you can't amend the agenda. You should try not to amend the agenda. And I was in the council the other night, we were having a discussion. I was like, that's something we ought to do. Yes, sir.
Find 7 days. So if our meeting's on Tuesday at 7, does it have to be prior to Tuesday or does it have to be on Monday before? What's the 7?
I take it as Tuesday in business.
Okay, so
I take it as, yep, full week. Yep.
You still have to schedule an emergency meeting. What notification, what notice? Specific amount, like you're mandatory that it.
Yeah, you have to post on town hall. Yeah, you have to post on town hall. I hate emergency meetings. I was doing the other day. You have to post on town hall. If you're a state body, you have to post on the state website. But they don't let you post it once it's 7 days notice. It's almost impossible to comply. There's a lot going on with that. But all you have to do is post it 24 hours in advance. And you have to, as part of that agenda, you have to state, we couldn't give 7 days notice because we had this emergency. Okay, that's what. Very good.
You seem to be using the term special meeting and emergency meetings interchangeably.
I am.
And we call special meeting anything that's not a regular meeting. It's not necessarily an emergency. We give 7 days notice.
So that, I understand. And I use those terms interchangeably because the statute uses them interchangeably. And remember my definition that I used before. Under FOIA, a regular meeting, not a special meeting, not an emergency meeting, is any meeting where there's 7 days notice. By the way, I hate the FOIA statute. I don't think it's well written. I think it's hard to follow, but
So if we decide, like frequently during budget time, we have special meetings.
you call it a special,
But we give 7 days notice.
and so therefore under FOIA.
Technically, it's a regular.
Got it. So, and that does get confusing. That's why I have that slide in there. Sorry. So an agenda, what's it defined as by the statute, right? General statement, the major issue expected to be discussed at the public meeting, as well as intent to hold an executive session. And the ground therefore. So that's all the agenda needs to do. Because the agendas are great. They're perfect. No issue with those. You can have the changes in the agendas. It's way easier to delete something than add something. I don't add anything from the agenda unless I can satisfy that 7 days in that emergency. It's just not smart to do. There are times when you can amend an agenda up till 6 hours before. So let's take my emergency situation. You were going to meet on a Tuesday. I found out on Monday night that I had this ticking time bomb. I can amend the agenda. It will be very rare that that happens because it has to be a ticking time bomb. There has to be something. And so, but it's really easy to take stuff off, so you don't have to do it. So, and those rules go for town council or the committee that's working on the statute that I just made up, right? That's working on the public artifact. They work the same. Yes, sir.
So if an item comes up during a meeting, that's practically not the agenda, we would be for table for the next meeting.
Yeah, so where this usually comes up, and I'm not speaking of my Newcastle experience here, I'm speaking of other jurisdictions unrelated to Newcastle. Where this comes up is a lot of times will be council comment or public comment. Things will kind of get started, and then there'll be a discussion. And then I have to say, this needs to stop. We need to put it on the agenda for the next meeting, because the public didn't have an opportunity to know that's what you're going to talk about. So you'll see a little flexibility, like you don't want to be shut everybody down from talking. There's a jurisdiction I represent, which is not in Newcastle County, it's further down. And they have public comment. It is the most awkward public comment that you have ever seen, because their former solicitor instructed them to say nothing. So people get up and give their public comment. There's no feedback. There's no, we'll put that on a future. There's nothing. They just look at it.
Leaving stuff on the agenda, is there a best practice kind of how far in advance for the public? So if somebody's coming for certain agenda item to comment, but that's the only thing being removed, like, is there a best practice?
You have to do it at least 6 hours before. However, I try to do it as fast as I can. As soon as I know something's going to come off the agenda, you amend the agenda, for whatever it's like. For example, Max is going to come give a FOIA presentation. That's what the agenda for tonight says, right? I trip and break my foot at 1 o'clock, right? We're going to have to cancel because nobody else can give the speech. Then at that point, we give as much notice as we possibly can. And then usually what I do is I send somebody over, if it's just, it's cancellation. Like we try to just be as open as we can with the public. Sometimes it's just unforeseen and that's just the way it goes. So you have to take minutes of all the meetings. So minutes here are great. There's a lot of detail in there. If I have to take minutes, so I will at some point in time, they're not great. I'm not a very good minute taker. But they only have to sort of capture what happened. They don't have to be a word for word recitation of what happened. It has to accurately capture what happened. So if you have an executive session, the minutes are confidential, executive session minutes, but only so long as they have to. Let me explain that. If I come in and I give a memo to council, we go into executive session, you get legal advice from me, council. You then, that advice, that's confidential, can never be disclosed. But let's assume you're buying a piece of property for a sewer treatment plant, a water treatment plant, pick whatever that is. And you're debating between 3 different properties, kind of doing, okay, that's fine. That's all confidential. When you finally buy that property and put that public improvement on it, after that, the confidentiality concerns go away. Because guess what? You bought the property, the improvements on there. So then those executive sessions are no longer protected from you. So something new. So now I'm going to go into executive sessions and tell you why and how you can go into executive sessions. They are in contravention. Remember the beginning, they talked about the public policy of FOIA, so everybody can see everything. Well, executive session, what is it? It's private. Nobody can see. Nobody's supposed to be close to secrecy. So they're closely scrutinized. So if you get challenged, and I'm talking about getting challenged. I can't remember if I left it in later, so I'm just going to talk about it now. There's 2 ways that you can be challenged under FOIA. One, you can send a petition to the Attorney General's office, say that there was a violation of FOIA, and then that's sort of administrative, and then there'll be an Attorney General's opinion on that issue. The second way is you can bring a direct suit in court. So you could say, you guys violated FOIA, and you go to the court of chancery, it's like a regular lawsuit. People tend to almost 99.9% of the time always go to the attorney general. Why? Cheaper, right? Send an email and it's done. There are groups, like there's a group now, it's called Judicial Watch, they're going after the University of Delaware, they got all of those from chancery. So, just sometimes, and if you win a FOIA case, get your attorney statute. So when I talk about a FOIA challenge, I'm talking about a FOIA challenge, I'm really talking mostly, not all, it's usually just sent to the Attorney General's office. So when can you go into executive session? To discuss potential employee, individual citizens, qualifications, the whole job. That does not apply to contractors. So, and you guys were well advised, Chris Griffiths and I came to interview, and we were all doing it in public, and that's got to be awkward. And I've had to do it a couple times. So a lot of people find that to be awkward. I have to go in. I just advised the municipality of that today. That their solicitor candidate search has to be the public. They didn't like that. I don't know if they'll listen to me, but that's what the law is. Strategy sessions, usually if we're not in a litigation, involving attorney at law or collective bargaining. And if you notice, on this one, it says, when an open meeting would have an adverse effect on the bargaining and litigation position of a public body. Well, the AG's office, nor the courts, told us what that means or who's supposed to have to find that. And I'll tell you that every single time I go into an executive session, I start it exactly in the same way. I start it like this. This is an executive session. You cannot have any straw polls. You have to stick to what's on the agenda, and you cannot vote in executive session. The statute, and then I phrased it, use this language. I say, I make the finding that it would have an adverse effect on the bargaining or litigation position. And the board folks at Newark, I've heard that for 20 years. Every time we go, do it that way and certify that's the way it goes. You can go in for litigation, or you can go in for potential litigation. A potential litigation isn't just we think we might get sued. I had an attorney who was a mentor of mine at a downstate firm when I was very young. And he's like, everything is a potential litigation, Board of Adjustment decision, everything. So we can go in under that. And I was like, that just doesn't sound right to me. He was ultimately proved wrong. Great guy. So it has to be likely or foreseeable that you're going to get sued. So I've been to a couple council meetings. Somebody comes up to the table and says, I'm going to sue you. Well, they've said, I'm going to sue you at every meeting the entire time for the last 2 years, and it's never happened. Litigation is likely foreseeable. Probably not. All right. But if it's a credible threat. So, sorry, I'm going to pick on my time with Newcastle County. There was a guy who, this is how I got started in this. His name was Frank Cherno. Mr. Cherno's hobby was suing Newcastle County. That was his hobby, he said. And he sued Newcastle County all the time. Well, guess what? When Mr. Cherno sent a letter, you could safely say he was going to sue us because he sued us every single time. So it's sort of a rule of reason of when that is. And I give the indicators of potential litigation. You know, attorneys like to write letters before they file suits. So if we got one of those letters, yes, we could go in. But it's got to be a realistic threat of litigation. So the other ones that are big for executive sessions, if you see B6 on the agenda, it's usually a memo from me that we're talking about on some topic because it's excluded from the definition of public record, or it could be something like trade secrets, which we'll get to in a minute. Employee disciplinary dismissal cases, unless the employee requests a public meeting. So I said at the beginning, I don't agree with the FOIA decisions. And I said at the beginning, some of these things are just odd to me. This is one that's very odd. I always took the position that because the employee may request a public hearing, that you need to tell the employee that you're talking about. Makes perfect sense, right? Because how would you know that it requested to be public if you didn't know it was happening? That's not what the AG's office is told. They said you don't have to tell the employee that you're having a hearing. So I don't know how they would ever request it if they didn't know that the hearing was about them or if the matter was. So that's what I mean. I don't agree with a lot some of the decisions. So when we go into executive sessions, minutes have to be taken. you have to vote. So every time we'll have a vote in public session, you have to have it on the agenda. So if it's pending litigation, it's D4, if it's personnel, it's B9, you know, we have to make sure we have the things on there and have to have a specific statute.
Can I just ask something? Sorry, if the case was for number 8, or, you would still advise to inform employee, right? I mean, like, that's the right thing to do.
I haven't been here long enough to know.
I'm saying like.
I have
it's
different
happened
jurisdictions.
before, Yeah, I don't know.
I have different jurisdictions. I will tell you. Oh, no, you understand, like, I was always of the opinion, and always advised that, until about 2 years ago, they had an opinion, it's like, no, you don't have to tell the employee. Well, okay, it's not, and that doesn't, so my job is not to make that decision, that's your job. I just tell you what the AG's office is telling, try to keep you in mind with what happens. Whether or not I agree with it, which I don't agree with their decision, but that's me ad-libbing and saying if I were the AG, maybe I would do it different. But it does seem kind of weird to me. Yes, ma'am.
So this says executive session must be on the agenda, and then the governing body must vote to hold it.
Yes.
Okay, so if they vote not to hold it, they change the agenda.
Well, I would say, here's the way I get around that. Yeah, I haven't had an executive session, everybody work, I say the word potential executive session. Then they take a vote to go into it.
Okay.
I've only had one time in my career where somebody said we had an executive session for a reason, and council voted to not go into executive session. Because generally, it's something that's important, like, yeah, it's got personnel matters. You don't want to discuss, you know, this is our legal strategy for this case we're taking. You don't want to discuss that. I had a very interesting one the other day. So it was a newly formed state body who I act as counsel for. And they needed to get a website and a domain. And the question was whether or not they could go into executive session to select it. Because if they selected it in public, and there's lots of people who watch this, somebody could go out and snap it up right away. So they could snap it up and then hold it hostage once they selected whatever it was. So that was a hard one to figure out how to go into executive session. And this is one where they have there's 100 eyes on every meeting. There's a lot of money involved.
Just a quick question. So if an employee was being disciplined and requested a public hearing, is that a notice requirement too?
Sorry.
Would the city have to advertise it as a public hearing?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think so. So you would have, and to be fair, Joe, I kind of messed up like number 9 is really the one. You had an employee disciplinary hearing, you would have to have the employee there because it's disciplinary. But if you just wanted to talk about an employee with their performance, that's on the 9. Okay, et cetera. So if I'm mistaken.
A quick question for executive session, if it's not listed on the agenda and you're in a meeting and the conversation the members are having is starting to go into a legal matter that is confidential and they move to go into executive session, is that permissible?
The answer to that question is probably not. Say it probably, and I'm going to qualify for this reason. If I'm in that situation, I know what's going on. Sometimes I don't. If I know what's going on, I said, that's not a proper topic for executive session tonight. We'll talk about it at the next meeting. Okay, we'll put it on the agenda and do it that way. So you know. Now, let's say that someone came in, right? They came in and they got up to that podium there and they said, I'm going to sue you tomorrow if you don't do blank, right? Well, that doesn't matter. We had no prior notice of, we couldn't have given it, and we don't have any time. I'm allowed to amend the agenda to have an executive session to do that, to deal with that complaint.
So that's my second question. So do you move to amend the agenda to add executive session?
Only in that situation. Yes, you move first. Move to amend the agenda to have the executive session.
Right, and then you can go into, move to that we go into executive session. No votes during executive session come out if you need to.
I've attended thousands of public meetings in the course of my career. Only seen that happen lawfully twice. Where they had something that where they could do that. That is not something you do absent of emergency circumstances. Now, have I seen it done more times? I remember I said legally twice. I've seen it done, but only legally twice.
Because I've seen it done where, conversations carry, it's not listed on the agenda. And then a motion is moved that we go into executive session.
Yeah, it shouldn't do that.
Okay.
So, and I'll pick on council, like last night, there was discussion. And then I let it go on for a little while, I'm like, no, we need to amend the agenda. And for council, I'm not very shy about doing that, and I don't mean to offend anyone, but I see you going down a path, I'm gonna say something. Choose to ignore me, fine, but I'm gonna say it. I thought that was kind of the right time last night, because I didn't want to encourage further things, so. You can't vote in executive session. And here's the thing, so my main job is I act as special counsel, litigation counsel, so I go to towns where I don't know the people or go to towns, I kind of get hired to go down there, for the executive session. We're supposed to be talking about my case, and they're talking about everything other than my case, right? I'll not let you guys do that, right? But they're talking, we're in executive session because they just want to talk in private. They don't want to have it in public. That's not allowed. So you're not going to do that. You can't stray from the topics. You can't go into executive session, talk about a contract issue or a lawsuit, and then turn it into an employment matter. So and you can't have a straw poll. So I can't tell you how many times I've been in these meetings where the council, see, I know I see a few yawns. I'm sorry, it's terrible subject matter, but I'm doing my best. I'm trying to keep my energy up. So I go in and they say, well, do we have consensus on this? And I go, no, we don't. You can't have consensus. You can't reach a decision. You have to in public.
Max, I'm sorry, guys, I'm asking questions to make this longer, but the example of our website, right? Like you go into executive session, let's say it was approved, right, for a good reason. But you still have to vote outside of it, and you cannot really narrow it because that would mean you're voting towards something, right? So can you use that example, just like how does that even work? Like, what would you even do in executive session about the website? Just curious. I mean,
So let's say there's 3 domain names. I've done this. 3 domain names, they have a discussion about the domain names. And then they have a discussion, I want this, I want that, whatever it is. And then I will formulate a motion in executive session. And I go, domain name, this one is going to be 1, this one's going to be 2, and this one's going to be 3. So if you want this domain name, your first motion is I motion to approve domain name number 1 discussed in the executive session. Everybody either puts their hands up or they don't like that one. If they don't vote against it, then they move to number 2 and then just do it that way. So it's never revealed the exact domain name until such time as they haven't acquired it. So that's what I mean about executive sessions not being public for all time. I think that's a great example of showing, well, once they buy the domain name and put it up, there's executive session minutes. There's no reason for them to stay. They're confidential until the time for confidentiality goes away. That's a good example. So what's a public record? Yes.
When a confidential session minutes become public, available for reasons such as you just suggested, are they automatically then made? Are they automatically
No.
like most minutes are?
No.
No. You have to apply.
Somebody would have to. So the way that would work is somebody that inquired about potential public record. And then generally they're like either executive session minutes. And they come to me and I said, hey, there's no reason to keep it confidential. Give them up. But trying to go back in the minutes and figuring out which ones, something that happened could be 2, 3, 4 years ago. It's not probably, but you would never be able to. So, public information, public records. If you look in the main definition, ridiculously wide. It's everything you can think of, right? So my favorite public record that I talk about all the time. You guys know where the Brandywine Town Center is? Used to be Brandywine Raceway. So they have a set of deed restrictions, and there was a model that was done as part of the deed restrictions. The model is a public record because it's part of the deed restriction. Except nobody can find the model. So it's been an issue, right? All right. Nobody can find the model. So everything you say, so you assume everything is public. But what we don't understand, what people don't understand, and this is where you get into trouble, especially with dealing with the public. So I appreciate the members of the public who are here. There's a bunch of stuff that's not public record. So it says, you start off, everything is public. And then there's these exceptions. So I'm going to burn through these exceptions for you, right? So again, and I forgot my page, don't use cuss words, don't call anybody an idiot, email, don't do that because it can come out. So personnel records, medical records, those are not public records. Trade secrets and commercial information. Let me tell a story about that. Represented a municipality, city of Newark, represented a municipality, I forget what the thing was, they wanted to build a bridge or whatever, what was the thing? And so they came in and they had an RFP that would be presented to council. Well, one of the 5 applicants stamped all over their presentation. This is trade secret, privilege, confidential, all that stuff. So the city was in a jam because they had intended to have public presentations. I'll call it a bridge, I don't remember, on the bridge or the thing. And they were like, what do you do? And I was like, you're gonna have to send the RFP back out. You have to redo the RFP and say anything you submit is public. Because they didn't expressly say that. And I was a hated man because it's been in the process for 6 weeks. But otherwise, it wouldn't be fair that the public who wanted to pick amongst the options for the bridge to not be able to see one of them. So that was our only way around it. So commercial or financial information, like think about this. The city's in a business deal that hasn't been consummated yet. Then, they're negotiating, and it's probably commercial and financial or investigating something. But once the deal is consummated, then it's public record. Investigatory files, criminal files, intelligence files, all the police stuff exempt. So any records specifically exempted from public disclosure by statute or common law. So there's lots of statutes, especially in the environmental end, where you have to do these emergency plans and all this stuff, and if they have a specific exemption, you have that attorney-client privilege, medical privilege documents, those kind of things. Those are under the common law. You don't have to produce those. A contributor to a charitable contribution. You don't have to say. Funny, I gave a donation for a project in Newark. I said I don't want my name to be on the list, so I invoked this exemption. And there were 10 people who gave. When you know my name was on the list, I don't think I have the specific exemption, but that was just a mistake. Labor negotiations, litigation which is not in courts. So what happened was generally FOIA is not, if you're in a litigation, you're supposed to get it through the court process, you're supposed to get stuff done through FOIA. So what happened was the court would say, no, I'm not giving you this stuff. So then they would try to FOIA it. The town would deny it based upon, well, that's a litigation in court. And we're in litigation against you. Mr. Day is litigating against us. He FOIAs us. I deny that because that's litigation. Well, what Mr. Day would do is he'd go get somebody else that lived in town to FOIA the exact same information. And then I didn't have a basis to deny it because that person's not in the litigation, right? So there was this whole, and it was an issue that we've been trying to get teed up before the AGs. The AGs agreed with us on this. Said, look, if you're in litigation, somebody's trying to FOIA litigation material, they can't do an end around to do that. So, executive session minutes, as we discussed, a permit to hold a deadly weapon, public library cards, and somebody told me, and I don't know this fact, that exemption dealt with, somebody looked up Clarence Thomas's library card files. And that's how that got into the federal law that carried over to the state. So here's my favorite one. So the members of the General Assembly are not subject to FOIA generally. So look at this. It says emails received or sent by members of the General Assembly or their staff. So if they send it by email, exempt, you don't have to produce anything. Then there's another one, 19, communication between a member of the General Assembly and their constituent, right? So if I send a letter, if it's to my constituent, it's protected. But if I send it to the city of Newcastle or to Max Walton, and I'm not your constituent, it's not protected. It's not a blanket exception. So what happened was that Mr. Flowers, his former state treasurer, wanted to get documents from the governor's office. And And the AG's office made a determination that since Mr. Flowers was seeking documents that wasn't a constituent, but that governor didn't send it to a constituent. They just sent members of the General Assembly, that Mr. Flowers could get them. And the AG's office said, yeah, that's the way it works. So, but the state system, because they're a state agency, they have a right to appeal. So the governor called me and said, we're appealing this. And so we went on. And the argument against us in this case, this Flowers case, was if just emails received or sent by members of the General Assembly, I could make anything exempt from FOIA if I knew a staff member in the General Assembly. If I knew anything, because it says, received or sent by members of the General Assembly. And that was the argument. That's not what happened. That's not factually what happened, but at the end of the day, they said, no. If it's an email and you copy member of the General Assembly or their staff, then that is not subject to FOIA. I will tell you what happens if somebody comes in and FOIA's the city of Newcastle because the representative sent something in. Most of the time, we're going to produce it. We don't have to. I mean, just as a matter of policy, we don't want to hide the communications, right? But it's not technically required. So I'm going to burn through a lot of these other ones. I cut a lot of these next ones out. This is a lot longer list, but everything deals with security plans, building plans, blueprints, MSC building stuff. We're going to run the sewer line. How you're going to build it, all that stuff. Bridges, tunnels, emergency responses, exempt from FOIA. The big one is IT. I have not been around long enough to sort of get into the operation to find out what's going on. Software companies all the time send FOIA requests to municipalities. Why would they do that? If they want to sell you a new system, they don't know what system it is. But guess what? Those software companies are doing that stuff. You don't know which one is fake. You don't have any idea which one is fake. And so the better practice is, and there's been a lot of municipalities hit because they answer these things. They have amazingly 2 months later something else. So, and military service discharge documents not subject to FOIA. There's a lot more, but I just wanted to do that as a general matter to go through this. All right. So records should be open for inspection to the public. And so, in other words, if you have a FOIA request and you're like, I want to see this box of historical stuff, you can come in and look at the box of historical stuff. We have to make it available. Problem is sometimes, and this would never happen with folks at Newcastle. I've seen it happen in other places. I want to go in and look at a box. They look at the box, put them in a room. You say, thank you very much. They leave. The 4 things you needed from that box now walked out the door because they stole them. And so a lot of times when somebody has to look at a box, remember the public, they sit somebody there to watch you for good reason. It's not because they don't trust you, it's that they've had this happen. You can have negotiation over FOIA. The request is not specific. You have to have it on your portal. You have to produce emails, and additional costs have to be paid by the additional costs have to be paid by the first month. So it's a voluminous. It's going to take more than an hour of time. We have to make them. We have to respond within 15 business days. My limited response with the city of Newcastle is, you guys don't wait. You guys tend to respond very, very quickly. Something like that. Where request came in today, here's the documents we have. And can you take a look at them? So that's good. You'll only get more time and extend beyond 15 days if it's voluminous records. If it's voluminous records, the attorney needs to review, or if it's in archive. Okay. Sorry.
Does the request have to identify why the person is requesting that information?
They can request it for any reason that they want. And there's been all kinds of struggle over the pending litigation. So attorney can be doing the suit is requesting stuff. And we know he's going to do that. So I got a little quiz that I throw in here, shorter than my FOIA class quiz, right? Can public comment be limited? The answer is yes. Are public bodies required to answer questions in FOIA? The answer is no. So people say, can you compile all this information for me? Can you do the addition? Why is this here? What's happening? Why are you doing this? No, you don't have to answer. if you have a confidentiality clause in the settlement agreement, that is void with the municipality. Can't do it because you're expending public funds, and you can't have a confidentiality clause in executive session. So you're hiring a arborist, pick a title, hiring an arborist. Council wants to go into executive session, discuss the interview question. The answer to that is no, you're not allowed. You can go in to talk about the arborist candidates. I had a body really mad at me the other night because I was like, they wanted to go in and that's exactly what they want to do. I'm holding up the voice. Look, you can't do this to answer the questions. So like, well, how do we get the right questions? I was like, I don't know, but you have to talk about people. You can't just go in for this reason. Kind of makes me the bad guy, but I'm okay with that. My favorite, this is a mayor that I had a very close relationship with. Someone stand up, said that she treated the councilperson badly. She said, you treated him like a pubis in some kind of Ford magazine, and the mayor said, get out. Send the police, send them out. I said, well, that's a violation of FOIA. You threw me out. I didn't threaten anybody. I didn't do anything. I was exercising my free speech limits. And they said, no, that was enough to warrant the mayor throwing that person out in that case. Are you required to post meetings on a website? Answer is also no. Are you required to respond to LSD requester? Answer to that is no. So if you're in from Delaware and you send it to me and say, what's the response? I guarantee you what it's going to be. Have a stop pattern. I was like, you don't live here. We're not responding to your question. So, yeah.
Sorry, quick question. You said, you don't have to post meeting minutes.
I did not say.
I thought you said no.
On the website.
On the website. You have to put those two meetings. You don't have to put them on the website.
Oh, you
You have to have, yep. Yep. So the Attorney General's office enforces this. We talked about that. This SOL here is statute of limitation. 60 days, not 6 months. So whenever we have a FOIA request, talked about the Attorney General's office. And so in the back, and I won't go through all of them, but you will see that there is there's a lot of these things that deal with a body not being a public body. In other words, a small committee turning themselves into a public body. And the other one is what I call serial forms. What's a serial form? There was a case back, it's been 15, 20 years ago, where the public body wanted to buy a piece of property for like a sewer improvement. And so the two people got together on council, went out with a realtor, looked at the property. And then they had 2 more people got together with the realtor, went out and looked at the property. And so on and so forth. So everybody got to look at the property. And they said, look, and they got challenged under FOIA, because of course they couldn't keep their mouth shut and talk about it in town meeting. They said that's a violation of FOIA. And the agent's office said that's a serial form because what you were doing is trying to subvert the public meeting requirements. Make sense? Well, the same thing occurs with emails. I had this not for Newcastle, but I had this today for another municipality in my office, where somebody sent out the agenda is going to be, here's the agenda. It's perfectly fine to send it out there for everybody's information. But you as council people who are on a committee, if you start saying, well, on item 5 on the agenda, I think we should do blank. That's a FOIA violation. Why is that? Because you're discussing public business outside of the public view. But that's the reason that there's a FOIA violation. So a lot of these are noticing kind of things. Yeah, and posting kind of things. By the way, you guys have one, I noticed, and that was held not to be a FOIA violation. Because there was an allegation that the council members must have met, and they said the burden of demonstrating, you have to demonstrate a prima facie case first, then the burden shifts over, the prima facie case wasn't met in that case. So that was the fastest I've ever gone through my FOIA presentation. I hope that everybody got something out of it, but I found been determined to stay on time. Start on time and end on time. I was told I had to be done by 8. So any questions on any of the FOIA stuff?
I think you went over what my question is, but I wanted to make sure. Yep, so I get an email from a constituent and they're complaining about their neighbor's property. And maybe it's on my personal email, maybe it's on my city email. And you know, a lot of times what we see is hey, I'm not happy with my neighbor's property, they're junking debris, but please don't use my name. You know what I mean? I want it to be anonymous. But if that neighbor then FOIAs and asks for all the emails regarding his property that were sent to council, that's a, you know, what I mean, we'd have to,
I might redact a name in that situation.
okay,
I might. I had that question today.
yeah,
I said, don't redact it. So I came up with the exact opposite. But there are provisions, for example, I know Newcastle County is also subject to FOIA, you call it a complaint, that complaint is anonymous, because they don't want retaliation. That kind of thing. So that situation, but let's say the FOIA was like, I want to see communications with Joe about the Riverdale Festival or whatever that was. Yeah, I'm gonna give the name. And even if you go to the AG's website and you look at the FOIA opinions, they put everybody's name and their email address right on the FOIA opinions, right? So you know who that person was. So here's one. I had one, so the mayor in this particular account had a database where she would mail out everything. So her opponent in the race for mayor, FOIA'd her list of all the people who she sent out, emails to, because that person wanted to get all the emails and email out their own stuff to that person. That was authority. I won't tell you how that one worked out, because I think what we did was not right, but that's what we did. So anyway. I have a little bit of ethics in government for you guys, so we'll switch time.
And just quick question. I keep hearing number 2 and 3 people violating FOIA in a meeting. And you were just talking about 2, but I've heard 3 before too, so.
So anytime that there's a quorum of individuals, I'm gonna pick on the county only to start using the quorum. Anytime you have a quorum of individuals, that's, you're
Okay.
talking about public meetings, right? So that's the general rule. But like Newcastle County has a rule that you can only meet with less than a quorum. So you can have 3 meet with 3 because there's 16. But those 3 can't then subvert that and go talk to another 3, right? So if you have 3 people together, I'm always going to try to keep you about 2. That's what I'm going to do.
Well, for us, 3's a quorum,
Oh, right. There you go. So I'm going to keep you at 2.
so we have
I'm
to
sorry.
stick to 2.
You have to stick to
But
2.
some of the larger commissions that have more than 5 people,
Yeah, you
it's
can. you can-
whatever, as long as it's less than a quorum, right?
Yeah, the idea is you don't want to whisper down the road, so everybody makes a decision before it starts.
Right.
That's the whole, that's the purpose of it. That's the serial quorum requirement, right? And let's face it, you guys are representative democracy, you're representing people, so go talk to constituents, talk to that. Just remember, if you're with your fellow council people. So story time. So this didn't actually happen to me, but it actually happened. There was I tell this in my board of adjustment, but this guy, he's a friend of mine, an attorney, and he went down to a small town down. And he went in and they had this 50 people in a board of adjustment case, which is a big deal, there's a lot of controversy. And so it was a long hearing and the board said, we're not going to vote tonight. We're going to come back in 2 weeks. We're going to vote. This is okay. So he changes his clothes and they go to a local pizza joint. In the town, there wasn't much else, a couple of pizza joints. Sits down, it's an old kind of pizza joint. They had like the side booths, So he sits down in the booth. He's sitting there and he hears, and he's with his clients. Here's people in the booth behind him talking about what a terrible job he did. And that he was a knucklehead and really getting after the guy. So finally he got upset because these people were talking about him and he had changed his clothes, he wasn't in a suit. He comes around and guess who it was? It was the entirety of the Board of Adjustment sitting there talking about public business and the decision they made. So guess what? Even though they wanted to vote against him, when they went and voted, right? Because he had him, because that is improper under FOIA. And I've seen, and there's a town I represent, and I only represent Newcastle like a solicitor. I represent a lot of towns as special counsel. Town that I represent, their council people go out to dinner after the council meetings. Just what they do. They go out and grab a beer together. I'm like, you guys can't do that. They're like, it's fine. We're not talking about public business. So one day I said, you mind if I come along? They said, sure, you're a friend, come on. They did nothing but talk about public business. They shouldn't have been there. I mean, it's just a fact. I'm like, you guys can't. I just sat there for about an hour, had my beer and my burger, and I said, you guys ain't doing this ever again. Because I just watched you. Like, it's a fallacy to say that you're not talking about. Now, look, you guys, although they're still virtual, if I ever go back to teaching in person again, if you guys wanted to come down, like get together and have a bus and go to my training, they hold in Dover, usually the Kent County Levy Court, there's nothing wrong with that. My advice to you would be, post something. We're all going to Levy Court training from the University of Delaware, or pulling together, just talk about your kid. Like, don't create an appearance of impropriety. Well, that's what we're gonna go into next, the appearance of impropriety. You can be doing everything right, and people still think you do something wrong. And that was a very famous politician who is now president of the United States. He told me this when I was 20 years old. He said, if the line is here, you're gonna be in public service, you gotta be up here. That's what I try to advocate, and that's what I try to do. By the way, sometimes we fall below that line, and we didn't mean to. Just try to do the best. So, we'll move on to ethics, because I'm on time, and I'm gonna be done by 8 o'clock, okay? So there are principles of conduct, which I found interesting. I don't know when they were adopted, but representatives for the city of Newcastle. So it's not just town council, it's not just people who work here, right? Professionalism, respect and stability, equal treatment. Listen to public comments, refrain from abusive conduct, personal charges, verbal attacks. You're a public official even when you're not engaged in city business. Try to hold efficient meetings. At least a few meetings I've been to have been very efficient compared to the city of Newark, which tends to go on all night. So I thank you for that. Try to achieve decisions on the merits and refrain from hindering the administrative functions of the city staff. Try not to criticize publicly staff. Council members will not discuss executive session or personnel matters outside of executive sessions. Try not to take unilateral decisions or take decisions out of our authority. And then I'm talking about the city administrator. So you guys passed those. Those are your standards that you had. But what I'm going to talk about tonight, which by the way, I think is a nice set of standards. I really do. I've seen quite like that in other places, but I think it's a nice set of standards. What I'm going to talk about is what could get you into real trouble. And that is, you guys are subject to.
Before going there, can I just ask clarification about this? If we're sitting in a meeting and I don't know, anybody in the public or on our council, let's say I'm talking, and somebody providing public comment or somebody else is talking, is it just city council president who can hold the order, or can anybody on the city council say, Mr. Zubaka, please adhere to, just an example.
I'm not like if somebody's violating one of these, right?
Somebody talking as public comment, and then me and Mr. Zelf are talking over that, or we're just like, disrupting that. Who is authorized to call?
No, it's whoever runs the meeting, whoever's the
So
chair.
it is the city council.
Whoever's the chair of the meeting has the gavel.
Gotcha.
So, and we don't go into Robert's rules and all that, but the chair can gavel in and gavel out anytime they want to. I mean, they can, so it's whoever has the authority to be chair. You guys seem maybe a little punchy every once in a while, but you seem relatively to get along, and there's very respectful.
I've seen it like once, and it wasn't even our meeting. I was just like, I don't know who is to call the order.
So you guys, pretty much everybody who serves is subject to the Public Integrity Commission. And it's, by the way, the Public Integrity Commission statute is written for state employees. As an editor, it says each municipality sets the benchmark for each municipality. So what I'm going to tell you about is state statutes. They don't talk about municipalities, so some of this stuff is kind of irrelevant, but I got to teach it. So here we go. So what's the purpose of that statute? It's to ensure public respect and confidence in specific standards. It applies to all local governments, including you guys. If you fall under the jurisdiction, you can, if you so choose, to adopt your own ethics board. I just decided to include who had their own ethics board as of 2002. And the reason I said that is I didn't look it up in 2003. So I don't know if anybody's at it. Who sits on the pick? There's 7 members. They cannot hold elective office, and it's 4 members. I have to tell you, it's terrible to be at the pick. It's terrible because you don't know who you're going to get. There's a famous student. I mean this. I actually very much like the pick now. I didn't like the pick in the old time, but this would happen at all times. I was asked to testify about a particular issue. And my municipal client was being charged with two things. And I have an attorney-client privilege. I can't speak about that, but I could talk about facts that happened outside of that attorney. I stopped short of saying anything that was attorney-client privilege. Well, they extrapolated from what I said and turned it into something that I didn't say. And my client went on with 2 charges, ended up guilty of 3 of them. It's got overturned. All right. So it depends on who's on the pick at the time. It's really important. Right now, pick is pretty good group. It changed. So what are their powers? They have really broad powers. They can issue advisory opinions. They can investigate, they can get records, they can do guides. They can implement financial disclosure provisions. Financial disclosure provisions don't necessarily fall to you guys. So what are the rules? Conflict of interest. You can't participate in something where you have a personal or private interest. That would be something that, in the fuzzy words, tend to impair a person's impartial judgment in the performance of their duty. What is that? I've always struggled with. What might impair someone in their judgment? Isn't that in the eyes of the beholder? Because I'm picking on a joke, but I've never did it. But I mean, joke and say, hey, I might have gotten a fist fight with that guy last week, but I can be impartial in this matter, right? You just don't know. I'm sure got a fist fight, but you get the point. So the statute defines where you have a close relative or a business interest, right? Financial interest. And if you have that, disclose. I'm going to tell you guys, if we're having a vote, and we have had a vote on a zoning application. I was here, so I'm going to speak about a zoning case. And or speak about that because it's the only vote that I know that you had. If that were challenged and one of you is found to have a disqualifying interest, should recuse. I don't think there's that going on here. I'm just saying. If one of you, even though the vote was unanimous, if one of you had a disqualifying interest, it taints the decision of the entire board and it gets reversed. That's in a case called Dale versus Town of Ellesmere. Maybe not Dale, sorry. Town of Ellesmere. I might not have the first name right. I'm doing all this by memory. So in the Ellesmere case, what happened was they had a proceeding to fire the police chief. And he has due process and he got to walk through. And the police chief's defense was, you're only trumping up these charges against me because I wouldn't hire Councilman such and such's nephew. That was his defense. So these are trumped up because I wouldn't hire his nephew. That guy didn't say a word. He just sat there. He voted. He said, I voted. You're out. Unanimous vote. Goes to the Supreme Court. They said, because that council person made the accusation that the reason was because of the nephew, that he should recuse him. Because he didn't, tainted the entire group. The police chief kept their job. No, 5-0 to do it. There's other examples I can go into that, right? So, for example, if you have an employee, right, that has a responsibility, that has a financial responsibility, should have that delegate their responsibilities to the other. If it's a matter of counsel, right, you should just recuse. Now, I'm not going to get into, there's this thing called the rule of necessity. What happens if the council all had a disqualifying interest? Nobody could vote. So then it would be a necessity that you would vote. There's some very tough rules that go into that. So I'll save my next slide for a little later. So you can't assist people in a private enterprise. In other words, of course, we're good public servants, but we can't say this is how you, we could say this is how you do it, but we can't do it for them. Ultimately, when does that apply? Can't help if you have more than a 10% interest based upon the statute. I will tell you that 10% interest in an entity rule is not followed by the PIC at all. If you have any financial interest, they're gonna find it disqualifying. So even though this, so I'm a text solicitor, so even though the statute says that, that is not what they're gonna follow, I'll guarantee. So even if it's a contract at less than 2,000 a year, they're not gonna follow. So an employee, this is a state provision, and we don't have anything, so I'm required to teach you what the state statute says. It says following 2 years of termination, you can't do anything since you gave an opinion about or got involved with. I assume that would apply to a municipality, but I'm not 100% sure because it's written this way. It's a violation of the law if you have an executive session or you had confidential information, you disclose it. True story, I was in a litigation. And we sent out, it was actually before my time. The former attorneys came in and they had an executive session. And they gave all of this stuff, like reports and things. The mayor, this is how long ago it was, the mayor faxed it to the newsroom. Violated the statute. But the cat was then out of the bag. And the municipality ended up losing a judgment because of that, in the tune of $43 million. And guess what? That was the worst day after Christmas I ever had. We got hired to try to fix that. Eventually got them out of it. They paid some money. But my point is, if you're a member of council, that privilege that you have with me or any other attorney is not your privilege or your council. So if one person violates, it should be going around talking about what's in the executive session. I'm not saying anybody here does, but I've seen it happen a lot. It's really important. And you're in violation of the PIC statute. So not only do you get municipality in trouble, you can get in trouble with the PIC. You can get waivers if you need to sometimes. And sometimes you can get an advisory opinion. So if anyone who has something official for the city, and they said, I don't know if I should recuse. Step one, come to us. Me, Lisa, Erica, Lauren, like we may be busy, but there'll be one of us who can answer the question. And you say, should I recuse or shouldn't I recuse? And sometimes we can solve that easily. And you would rarely go for an advisory opinion, but if it's a close call on a big issue, I'm getting an advisory opinion because it doesn't matter what I think, it matters what they think. And that gives you some insulation. Look, this PIC stuff, this is what the treasurer had, right? McGinnis, that was all public integrity stuff. That was illegally structuring a contract for a firm, appointing her daughter when you weren't supposed to, and it was favorable treatment. So I'm going to talk about the next one. The Public Integrity Commission, buzzwords, almost every decision doesn't have an appearance of impropriety. Well, I saw you smile a little bit because nobody. What's that?
Governor Conley looked away.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I didn't do the clip art. I didn't do
That's
the
what I was trying to say.
So what's an appearance of impropriety? So I have a question. So quiz time. Let's say we wanted to develop a rental permit fee ordinance in the city of Newcastle. I don't even know if you have it. But let's say you want to develop it. And everybody who has a rental's got to pay $200. Okay? And you own 2 rental units, which is going to require you to then pay that $200. You have to recuse. Is that an appearance of impropriety? It's not. There's not right or wrong answer.
I would say yes.
Okay. Take Sam's actual situation. What happens if you have a tax that you're going to increase taxes, which is going to affect you all? Right? Should you all recuse? The same situation. So what's the appearance of impropriety? It depends on the situation. And it drives me nuts because it's hard to say for sure what an appearance of, not impropriety, it's appearance of impropriety. Very big cream. Can't put my finger on it, but there are things, if you're doing something and you're voting on something that's your wife, uncle, cousin, best friend, etc., you should recuse. You're going to be able to make money off of it, like real money, maybe not a rental permit fee, but you're going to put in this project if somebody's gonna build something, you're gonna get deck railings, it's your contract. Yeah, you should recuse, right? That's the way it's going. So it's a very difficult standard. Shouldn't take gifts. So I spoke with Debbie, the lady who runs, the attorney for the Public Integrity Commission. Sorry, I was no Public Service Commission today. I almost misspoke. Public Integrity Commission, I spoke with her, and she said that they had a person that came to them for advisory, and it was on a council, and the town had a police force, about 100, it's a big police force, and his son-in-law worked on the police force. And the PIC said he couldn't vote on any piece of the budget that related to the police, because that was an appearance of impropriety. So what they had to do in that town, well, he was elected to pass the budget, right? That's what you're elected to do, right? You decide where to spend the money. So they had to like carve out the police budget, make him go through this different process so that he could vote on the rest of the piece of the budget. Personally, he's one of 100 police officers. I don't think it's going to matter to him, but that's how far they took the appearance of propriety. And so it is. And the appearance of propriety is in the eyes of the beholder. But they give you some rules, right? If you're so mad at somebody that's going to impair your judgment, you should recuse, right? If it looks like it's bad, even though it's not, you probably ought to recuse, right? So you ought to file. So there's financial disclosures. The PIC does not require financial disclosures. A lot of times, I don't know that we have it here, but sometimes we say, like, you own a business, like I have to do it. So I own 2 businesses. I own a partnership, I'm a partner in a law firm, so I own a piece of that. And I have an LLC with my mom, we own a piece of property. So that's 2 businesses. So sometimes you're required to disclose. Some jurisdictions do that. I haven't been here long enough to know if you guys do that or not. I just don't know. So I'll give you, I give you the next piece, this recent advisory opinion, because I thought it was a very interesting opinion. So this person wanted this historical artifact, right? Town said no, and then they said, well, we'll appraise it and then we'll sell it to you. And then they couldn't find an appraiser, so then he asked again, can I have this artifact? And so the town said, well, we kind of want to give it to you, but let's seek an advisor. So they said the proposed contract made the artifact a gift, and in asking for the gift, it was already impaired judgment, right? And that they had to go through bidding to get rid of this artifact, right? Or they would need to be given preferential treatment. I don't know what the artifact was, but clearly nobody really wanted it, right? I mean, you can tell, so that's what it is. So again, you can get waivers and advisory opinions. Most of the time we won't need a waiver, we're just going to recuse, especially with town council. There's some confidentiality provisions which are in the statute. The PIC doesn't follow the confidentiality provisions in their own statute, because they have decided that even though the statute says the complaints have to be, statute says the complaints have to be kept confidential, but they have an opinion from the AG's office that says they can't do that. They've never amended the statute. So even though the statute says we're going to keep it confidential, somebody files a complaint in the PIC, it then becomes a public document. So it's very odd. So my point is, I hate going to that. Look, if you go to the PIC, it's a full scale here, it goes all the way down. You have defense counsel, like you get to be witnesses. I mean, it's a trial. It's a trial, and you get prosecuted by a prosecutor. Debbie is a prosecutor, and trials get those. And they can make a complaint on their own if they so choose to do so. Seen that happen. You can file a complaint against somebody else, and you get the prosecutor. Subpoena witnesses. It's a full-fledged trial. So, and then the consequences. What happens? I told you about the practical consequences. When the guy from Ellesmere didn't recuse, and they have to keep the police chief, you get a reprimand or censure. You can be removed if you violate. An elected official can be removed from office. There's sanctions, there's administrative sanctions for misuse of public office for private or for private gain, or for improper disclosure of confidential information. And then, so you can face up to a $10,000 fine and up to a year in jail. If you have impairment of judgment, you represent somebody in a state agency, contracts with the state, public, etc. So, and I think a big thing for you guys is if you did something council or approved where, you know, there was a pig complaint, it's voidable, the action is voidable. So let's say you made a vote, the pig says you violated it, it can void that action. It's not void because you can still have it, but it's voidable in that action. So at the end of the day, and I encourage you guys, if we get into that situation, let's just be honest about what our conflicts are. And you can manage them. So I represent the city of Newark and have my whole career, lived in the city of Newark, and I bought the property across the street from my mom, and I wanted to make a little tiny subdivision, right? Because it's across the street from my mom, and I want to clean up these properties, it's a little tiny thing. Well, I have a right to approach the city to subdivide my lot, right? I mean, I'm allowed to do that. But I'm also up talking to the council all the time about all kinds of other stuff. It was a very dicey situation. But we worked with the city and their ethics board and all that stuff to make sure that everything was done. Everything was done above board, and now that's over. And I will never subdivide a piece of property ever again in my entire life. I'll guarantee you. I'm a land use lawyer. I will never do it again. So, are there any questions? I went awfully fast because I wanted to make sure I stayed on time. But I really truly despise the FOIA statute because it's tricky, it's hard. And a lot of times it turns me into the bad guy because I have to say, no, you can't do this. But that's what the law is. It's rather having me tell you to do it than the Attorney General's office. We have my one client said, we're just not going to listen to the Attorney General's office. I'm like, okay, if you don't do that, the Attorney General's going to sue you and the Attorney General. I hope you all got, yes, sir.
I have a couple of questions.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for the presentation. Very helpful. In regards to this topic that you mentioned, but does affect all, of course, the city council and all other related subcommittee meetings, and that's public comments. You mentioned that there's a requirement to have public comments.
Yes, sir.
With respect to the city council, I believe it's 3 minutes.
Yes, sir.
And for some time figure around that for some of the others. The 3 minutes, that's something that's set via ordinance by council.
In Newcastle, yes, it is. But I will say,
Our city, okay, our city set that, so they could amend it. Yeah, right. And then the second piece to that is presentations. We've all been in a lot of meetings where a lot of different outside groups give presentations. And quite honestly, some of them have kind of worn us out. Is there a mechanism or is there any case law conversely to that to kind of cap a presentation by outside organization coming in?
Yeah, so yes, I don't know of any case law, but I know of examples where that happens all the time. So places that have a lot of development activity, we hope that Newark, those kind of places, they put the developer in there 1 hour. That's it, you're done. And a lot of board of adjustment. In other words, I did the board of adjustments where there's 100 people there and everybody's up in their arm. Usually beforehand, the board attorney says, 1 hour for you, 1 hour for you, that's all you're getting. So the answer to your question is yes, you can amend the code. If I go in and act as special counsel, which I'm not doing here, let's say I go to, I'm picking a municipality that's far away, Georgetown, somebody I've never represented. I go in to work with them. And I come in and there's an angry mob of 200 people and I'm representing the board. I dictate that we're going to be 15 minutes or we're going to be there all night. I had a board of adjustment hearing one time that had 1,000 people there at the Newark High School. And yeah, if we gave everybody 3 minutes, we would have been dead. So the other thing was, we said you can have public comment. You're going to get 2 minutes. And we're only going to do public comment for 2 hours, right? Because otherwise we've been there all night. We were there all night, it turned out, but there's that. Did I accurate, did I totally
It's like, I just presented it because I've heard and I've heard from people, and I've also felt like, you know, the public comment is capped at say 2 to 3 minutes. Then an outsider, you know, who's not necessarily vested in the community can come in and speak for 2 hours.
Just like an applicant or something like that.
Well, actually, I have a question, and I think I know which one you're talking about, when we voted on the Lucas.
Lucas Drive, yep.
Right, and there were a lot of complaints that the developer went on for an hour and a half, and then we capped
2
the
hours.
public, yeah. The whole meeting went 4 hours, but at any rate, the public comment was limited. However, if I understood you correctly, at the beginning of that meeting, you told us, the council members, that we had to vote based solely on the information presented that night.
Correct.
So if you cap the time that the developer has to present, we may not be able to get all the information we need to make our decision.
You know what, this is great, this is one of those debate things that you guys can have amongst yourself. I just know that there are places
But
that say,
but am I right about that? That
Could.
we could not make a decision based on something that developer
Yes.
said at a prior meeting?
that's right, you have to
Only
base it
what said that night.
on the record. If you have a development proposal, you're not supposed to about anything else, about what's presented, so we have.
But only what's presented at that meeting,
on
not at
the
a prior
record.
meeting.
That's
Even
right.
if that prior meeting was on the record, we can't go back to something that was said then, at this meeting.
That's what they presented here, because they got a hearing before the planning. Planning commission.
So,
Planning commission makes their recommendations, all part of the record, but you have to decide based on what the testimony is, because they could change their testimony from what they said at the planning commission, what they're hearing now, that's why you can decide on this record.
but we would have to tell them up front, not just the night of the meeting, you're limited to an hour or
Yeah, so
whatever.
if you wanted to do that, by the way, attorneys can get a lot of stuff in an hour, it's sometimes. There are certain land use attorneys like to go on and on and on, and they drive me crazy, right? So, right, Joe? Right, there's certain ones that go on and on. You can do it, and the same land use attorneys function just fine in the hour that they have it. They function just fine. And if something would needed to go on, most of the time, the chair says, that's your hour, right? I'll give you 5 more minutes, right? Get it done. And if you know going in, I'm gonna have this amount of time, maybe you cut down the different people that you bring up to talk about different stuff, things like that, so. But that is what I like to call not legal, just a political decision. You can do it if you want to, don't have to. But you have to give the applicant enough time to satisfy due process. 3 minutes for an individual speaker or public comment has been determined in Delaware to be sufficient amount of time to satisfy due process.
Right. And just to let you know, I remember reading, I forget where it's at, but it does say 3 minutes, but also says you can't give your time to someone else either. Can't.
You cannot, which is a good rule. It's a good rule because of the ceding of time and all that stuff, I'm trying to attract. Anyone else have any further questions? Yes.
Are things like, police interaction reports and car crash reports followed for you?
So I'm not the best at the police stuff. There are certain like information that you can get, but it's limited and not every police report is. But I just don't know the specifics of it.
They were just talking, chief was just talking about House Bill
House
205.
205, 206, that's for about disciplinary actions against
That's disciplinary.
very individual.
Parents see more, they have to report more publicly. But I don't know if it's an aggregate or.
But if that's like
Yeah.
an accident report, I don't know if that applies to that or not.
So my good friend Chris Griffiths, who was the solicitor before, he was my police guy. Like he knew how to do all that stuff. So now he's not here anymore, so I have to learn. So I'll take it upon myself to learn a little bit better because I do land use and talk about FOIA.
What bill is that?
House Bill 205 and 206.
They're on Thursday, they're gonna be, discussing it at that call, so.
Are there any further questions? I'm hopeful because I went so fast, everybody got something out of it, but I've enjoyed having the opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah, can we talk about